general, loved by lakhs and trolled on Twitter by thousands.
The region, the areas into which, from where the construction of the Nord Stream.
I'm really impressed, and this is the third time I have this honor to talk to you directly.
General Syed Ata Hasnain to this forum and thank him for accepting our request. We are privileged to have you for the third time on the CKS platform, sir, and it's an absolute pleasure having you here. CKS, Center for Knowledge Sovereignty, is more than a decade-old independent, non-partisan public policy think tank that works to ensure knowledge sovereignty, data sovereignty, security, and sustainability in India. CKS is led by a decorated veteran, Lieutenant General Dr. D.P. Shekatkar, former DGMO and head of the Shekatkar Committee of Defense as the chairman, and Lieutenant General V.M. Patil, a decorated veteran, as the vice chairperson, and he is also a former DGMO, and Mr. Vineet Goenka as the secretary of CKS, who is already there with us in the session today. The organization CKS engages in research and policy consulting in a broad range of fields ranging from data sovereignty, data privacy and protection, geospatial technology and sovereignty, cyber security, cyber warfare, critical infrastructure protection, disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D analytics, drone technology, etc. Trade agreements, geopolitics, sustainable energy and environment. The aim of CKS is to impact these focus areas with positioning India as a world leader by ensuring data and knowledge sovereignty, political and strategic insights into major threats and risks to our society, driving change and policy initiatives to fuel growth of the economy, bringing together leaders and stakeholders from multiple sectors to common platforms, enable the Indian human capital via encouraging research, innovation and application in a sovereign manner, encourage Make in India and indigenous research and technology. During the COVID lockdown over the past 2 years, we have organized several webinars under different themes, and one such theme is Thus Spake Generals, which is conceptualized by veteran AVM Pranay Sinha sir. He is there with us today and he will be speaking after me. And we also have Dr. Deepa with us, who has been instrumental in this program, Thus Spake Generals. The webinar series focuses on geopolitics and national security, and we are honored to have several dignitaries as our speakers on various subjects during our past 2 seasons. In our first season, which was held in July and around July and June 2021, we have 5 distinguished veterans as our guests. We had Lieutenant General PR Shankar, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, who is also there with us today, Vice Admiral Sekhar Sinha, and Air Marshal SS Soman. In the second season, which was conducted in October and November 2021, we had 5 distinguished speakers: Air Vice Marshal Dr. Arjun Subramaniam, Air Marshal Anil Khosla, Lieutenant General Dipender Singh Hooda, Lieutenant General Zamiruddin Shah, and Vice Admiral Anil Chopra. In our third season, which begins today, we are honored to have the first speaker, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, and the other speakers who have consented to speak are Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, Lieutenant General Shokin, Air Marshal D Choudhary, Rear Admiral S.Y. Shrikhande, and Ambassador Sajjanhar. So now let me introduce our guest speaker of today in a few words. Decorated veteran Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, PVSM, UYSM, AVSM, SM, VSM and BAR, who has in his 40 years of illustrious career served in almost all spots of the army postings from Sri Lanka to Siachen, Northeast to Jammu Kashmir, and even in UN operations from Mozambique to Rwanda. He had 7 postings in every rank in Jammu and Kashmir and was decorated in almost all of them, and finally commanded Srinagar Base 15 Corps. He, as we are all aware, is a much sought out personality for TV debates by all channels, and he writes extensively on geopolitical issues in all major newspapers. His strong academic background, courtesy Sherwood, Nainital, St. Stephen's, Delhi, Royal College of Defence Studies and King's College, London, and the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, Hawaii, has helped in shaping him as a very effective internationally famed speaker across the world. Presently is associated with the Vivekananda International Foundation and Center for Joint Warfare Studies, St. Joe's, and is on the governing council of the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies at New Delhi. He is also a member of the National Disaster Management Authority with status of Secretary Government of India, and is nominated member of the Empowered Group on Communication Strategy related to COVID and public grievances. General is also a Chancellor of the Central University of Kashmir. Now I request Air Vice Marshal Pranay Sinha, VSM retired, moderator of the session, to take the program further. Viewers, AVM Pranay Sinha, in his 35 years of distinguished career, held many important appointments and post-retirement worked as an advisor to Bharat Electronics for 3 years and is an active member of our think tank. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks, madam, for info for all. Madam Sumitra Goenka is the director, Retd Infotech, CEO Global Triangle Global, and one of the strongest pillar of strength of CKS India. Good evening, viewers. As a moderator of this flagship webinar series, I generally pose few questions of yours selected from the chat box, and that too after the talk is delivered by our esteemed and erudite speaker of the day. And before the talk, in a minute, I attempt to rationalize, contextualize the subject selected for the evening. But ladies and gentlemen, today, मैं confuse हूँ. Fortnight before, my perception was that one of our nation, the bullying nation, our northern neighbor, is trying to play a new global game, great game, in our neighborhood, and is trying to establish new set of trade and even world order. But then the fast-paced happenings of last 10 days, wherein the original player of the great game is back with a bang, and the way is pounding its neighbor, the geopolitical world is getting redefined, reset. And this has put this great spiritual country of ours, as referred in a recent talk by the rock star historian of the era, Yuval Noah Harari, in a very, very contemplative mode. Yes, this land of saints and sages of different faiths and religions, different school of thoughts, be it from Sanatan Dharma or Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, or even Islam, like Deobandis, Barelvi, the Qadianis, Ahmadiyyas, Bohras. We are today, to me, it appears, are in dilemma. Which side we should be seen with, whether we should be on ethical, moral ground, or we should stand by the time-tested friendship or strategic interest. Ladies and gentlemen, when one is confused, turn to our Guru, strategic geo affairs Guru, the scholar soldier, people's general, loved by lakhs and trolled on Twitter by thousands, General Syed Ata Hasnain. Sir, over to you, sir.
Air Vice Marshal Pranay Sinha, thank you so much. And also, my compliments to Shri Vinod Goenka ji, my compliments to Sumitra Goenka ji for the invitation which has been extended to me and the honors which have been done out here to me, reading out my complete bio for so many hundreds of people. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be back on a platform which has, I would say, contributed tremendously to India's developing strategic culture. This is one of the, as I identify, one of the major strategic weaknesses in India has been strategic culture. The understanding of geopolitics, the understanding of national security. Because by and large, people associate national security with the border security, with holding weapons in your hands and thinking that you can secure your nations through weapons. Actually, nations are not secured by weapons. Nations are secured by knowledge. And knowledge is one of the most important things which many times is lacking. I'm speaking at a very, very crucial juncture in history. I don't know from where I thought of this subject at that particular time when Air Vice Marshal Sinha asked me as to what I would like to speak on. I said, why not, let's not speak on the new great game. And the last time I spoke, I can admit to you, last time I spoke on the new great game was 5 years ago in Singapore. The Rajaratnam School of International Studies, one institution, and the other was the Institute of South Asians. Both understood the importance and the meaning of this terminology, the new grade game, and they invited me to come and speak there. I thought I must try and see if there is interest of this in India, because it affects Indian security, national security in a huge way. Little did I realize that at the time that I would be speaking, connected actions would be taking place, not in the immediate neighborhood, but in a different theater, which has huge bearing upon the new grade. So let me try and first of all connect up geopolitics of the world for you, explain what the new grade game is, and then go and talk about how this whole thing affects. Currently, there are 4 major hotspots. So there are 4 major theaters of geopolitics. Number 1, okay, that's in no particular order of priority. Okay, 1 is Eastern Central Europe, where things are happening at the moment. The second is the Middle East, or West Asia, as they call it. The third is Central Asia. And the fourth is the Indo-Pacific, which has not emerged as a theater of conflict yet, but is fast as well. These are the 4 theaters, and events there in these places interplay with each other. It may appear that they are geographically separated, they are strategically, dislocated from each other, but actually there is tremendous linkage between all 4 of them. So we are going to be speaking about the new grade game, but it's hugely connected, happening today in Ukraine. And therefore, I shall endeavor to spend 5 minutes at least to explain my perceptions of the manner in which things are developing there and what effect it can happen. On the other theaters that we are talking. So if there is a thing called new grade game, there is obviously something called the old grade game. So what is the old grade? The old grade game was all about what is called spheres of influence. And it was located primarily on Central Asia. The target and the aim of it was the territory of India, the British Indian Empire, considered one of the richest areas of the world always, and very widely wide by other major powers. And in this case, the old grade game, it was the former Russian Empire, then the Soviet Empire. The Russians, the Soviets were never in great relationship with many of their neighbors. They fought Japan, for example, the Russo-German War of 1904, right, where the Russians actually got defeated. But their geopolitical and geostrategic differences with many of the European countries, Germany, for one of them example, and UK and Britain, was very. The British Empire was the largest empire at that time, and every effort was being made by the Soviets later and the Russians earlier to impinge physically on this area of the British Indian Empire, down south, from the Central Asian region down up to the area of Kashmir, the Pakistan area, Afghanistan, Iran. This entire area considered very rich, and very importantly, the connectivity which it gave to the Indian Ocean. Otherwise, Russia, if you look at it, it's very interesting to see how those same connotations are coming true today. The Russia, for example, has no access to the sea except through the area of Vladivostok in the east, right? The port of Vladivostok in the east and to the Pacific, or into the Baltic Sea through the region, the areas into which from where the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was being done, or through the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. The old grade game was all about attempting to impinge southwards, to extend Russia's influence, the Soviet influence, into the areas which give access to the warm water trade. You see, one of the biggest problems that Russia and the Soviet Union faced was accessibility. It is not easy for them to carry out their trade. Even if we have to trade with Russia, if the Black Sea was not there, we would have to go through the Suez Canal, through the complete Mediterranean, swing around through the English Channel or over the North Sea, and then head that way into the Baltics. that is the kind of trade route we would have to employ. Or go to Vladivostok, the other way. But because the Black Sea exists, and because the Sea of Azov exists, and because Crimea is there, and because Sevastopol is there, and because Odessa was there with the Russians earlier, it was always possible to make. And this obsession with trade was very high. Naturally, trade is what matters to nations. The economics of no nation is an island unto itself. It has to live with the international community. It has to trade. Only that trading can ultimately lead to the development of the economy. So how strange that almost the same things which happened in the early part of the 20th century when the British Empire, this territory of South Asia, the Indian subcontinent under its control, how at that particular time the Russians were attempting to do exactly this. They attempted to take over areas around the north of Pakistan, Central Asia, that is essentially Afghanistan and places like that, so that they could extend their influence here, have their complete spheres of influence here, and through that make an access into the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, and at the same time into India, which was always considered as the jewel in the crown as far as the British Empire was concerned. Later, if you remember, recalling this importance of sea routes, if you recall, even in 1979, when the Soviet Union came into Afghanistan, all assessments used to tell us in those days also then of the Soviet obsession with reaching the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. And that would ensure that they could negate the US advantage of being right there in Diego Garcia and places like that, controlling the northern hub of the Indian Ocean. So that is what the old great game was, essentially. Spheres of influence. It did not physical conflicts. Conflicts did take place, but the intention was never to fight physical conflicts. As such, it was all through various means of what we would call soft power, primarily through efforts at soft power. But later it translated more into military action, such as what happened with the Russian invasion or the Soviet invasion in 1979. So this is what the old great game was all about. Now, what's the new great game? Now, the new great game actually started coming about after the end of the Cold War. The Cold War ended in 1989. The Berlin Wall fell, and the Soviet Empire, the Soviet Union, broke up into 15 republics in 1991. Many of those republics, of course, all the republics joined together to form what is called the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States. And then, of course, you had the Central Asian region. Five former Soviet republics existed. You had the 3 Baltic republics, all of whom joined NATO. On the other side, you had the Warsaw Pact countries such as Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, etc. All of those countries which are in the news at the moment. All these countries which formed a part of the Warsaw Pact and were aligned with the Soviet Union against NATO, the American Western camp. All these countries also ultimately, progressively joined NATO. 2003, 2004, many of these countries joined NATO. Joining NATO was an opening, a gateway into the European Union, and joining the European Union meant major development as far as the country was concerned. Everyone was looking at the example of what happened to East Germany when East Germany merged with West Germany, how the entire Germany came up together. The quality and standard of living, of quality of life of the people of East Germany got completely transformed. So post 1990, this region of the former old great game, extending from Iran into northern India, the Pamir Knot, the areas around the eastern peripheries of the Pamir Knot, extending into Xinjiang and places like that, and the complete Central Asian republics, Afghanistan and Pakistan. This became the geographical stretch. Again, the whole competition for vying for spheres of influence started here. The parameters on which this vying for these spheres was concerned was not necessarily just simply the routes leading across the roof of the world. The Pamirs and the Tibetan Peninsula, as you're aware, is called the roof of the world, but many other things. Number one, energy, right? At some stage, it was always known that the gross ultimately recoverable index of energy from in West Asia would dwindle. In the 70s and 80s, a lot of assessments used to be made as to how much of energy does West Asia actually have, and can it sustain in this manner. And by the 90s, it was becoming quite clear that there's a limit to the gross ultimately recoverable energy which is there available in West Asia. So there are alternatives which were sought. For example, the Americans, of course, sought the alternative of a shale gas, and that made them independent of the Middle East or West Asia completely. Very interestingly, the center of gravity, or a second center of gravity, almost emerged, and this was in the Trans-Caucasus area, around the areas of southern Russia, Turkmenistan, very, very large provider of natural gas. This is the region, and Russia itself, of course, which had oil today, which has got a tremendous amount of oil and gas, providing it to the whole of Europe, providing it to China in a very, very big way through the Siberian routes on the eastern side. So oil and energy as alternative resources became very, very important. It was known that if the hydrocarbons of the Middle East and West Asia would dry up, then they would ultimately have to go back to these areas. This is the alternative areas. And therefore, in reserve, having influences in these areas would almost guarantee you some kind of an economic security through the resources which were available. The second thing was the routes or the infrastructure. One is, of course, access from here into the Indian Ocean, three areas primarily, through Iran, through Afghanistan, Pakistan. This is actually only two major routes through which it can come out, through Iran and through Afghanistan, Pakistan. Iran is even in 1991, post-91, Iran was a pariah. It became a pariah after 1980. After all the incidents which happened in the Iranian Revolution and especially the hostage taking which was carried out in Tehran, Iran became the pariah of the world, and therefore making access through Iran always became a challenge. But Afghanistan, the route via Afghanistan, Pakistan was very much viable. But then Afghanistan was in the throes of post-Cold War dynamic, and after 2001, particularly, it was under the dynamics of the post-9/11 environment. So right from 1991, Afghanistan, the routes via Afghanistan, Pakistan have also been extremely tenuous. The best example you can take is that the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, TAPI pipeline, as it's called, $10 billion. It was a $10 billion project, probably cost you much today. That project, if it had succeeded, if there was stability in Afghanistan, and if Pakistan was willing to work towards stabilizing and creating this project seriously, the benefit that India would have got is that 25% of India's gas requirement would have been completely, which is a huge thing. India is a guzzler of energy, as you are aware, because of industrialization, because of economic progress that the nation is making. Our nation is a nation of is a guzzler of energy. It could have absorbed all this. 25% of our requirements would have been met. But Afghanistan was unstable. Pakistan deliberately did not want this kind of a benefit to reach India. Otherwise, Pakistan was virtually spiting the face by cutting off the nose, virtually. Otherwise, imagine the kind of royalties, etc., they would have got from the routes and the infrastructure which would have been created, the pipeline which would have been created. So, unfortunately, the energy part of it has remained unexploited so far. Then, the second important aspect is other infrastructure. This has been fairly successful, although security-wise, it still remains tenuous. What is this infrastructure? This is essentially roads and railway. Increasingly, also, it is becoming internet connectivity, the hard way of connecting the internet through cables. That is also happening through this area, east-west. It is China, primarily China, which is China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, led it to various areas of the Pacific, various areas in eastern Indian Ocean in the areas of Myanmar, attempts to get to Thailand and things like that. But in the middle was the Indian landmass, where it has, of course, made no ingress. And the rest of it is all extending towards Europe, extending towards the Middle East, and through that into Africa. Of course, there's the new Silk Route, which it is attempting, in which India is also part of the connectivity, but we are not talking about that. We are essentially talking about the Belt and Road Initiative in terms of the land route. The railway connectivity has been created, but all this remains extremely vulnerable. Remains extremely vulnerable. Before I describe why exactly it remains vulnerable, you must remember that the Chinese have experimented and have already carried out the movement of goods, railway goods trains, extending from Shanghai all the way to almost. That's probably the longest connectivity anywhere in the world. Of course, railway connectivity can never compare with the sea lane connectivity. Sea lane connectivity, you can load millions of containers, and that is the best form of trade connectivity. But nevertheless, this is an alternative which the Chinese have created. What they are most concerned about is a third phenomenon. We spoke about connectivity to the sea. We spoke about the physical connectivity of roads and railways. The third aspect, which is a very abstract concept, is the influence of ideology in this region. Now, this is where the real importance for India comes in. For much of the world, actually, it comes into this area. You see, the 5 Central Asian republics. At one time, I remember we used to always question our officers in the army, give us the names of the 5 republics, and most people could not ever name them. To trouble someone, you always said, name us the 15 republics which broke up from the Soviet Union, and no one could ever remember. So the 5 republics, to name them, were essentially Kazakhstan, which was nuclear, if you remember. Of course, over a period of time, the nuclear assets were removed from Kazakhstan. But Kazakhstan is a very, very important country. And you've seen in recent months what's happened. A burst of nationalism which has emerged in Kazakhstan against the Russian influence. And that is something very, very dangerous for Russia. The other countries are Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. All the stans, as they are called. And these are all former Soviet republics. And you know that in the Soviet Union, faith, religion, religious ideology was right. Although there was no restriction as such to pursue your faith, but it was never pursued in the whole hog manner. So when the Soviet Union broke up and these 5 republics emerged, all of them are Islamic. And north of them and south of Russia, the rump state of the Soviet Union, are areas like Chechnya, Dagestan. There are 11% population of Russia, particularly southern Russia. The biggest concern was, and if you remember early 90s, the one thing that we were all fearing at that time was the rise of political Islam, which had taken place. It was almost a response after 79. After 1979, the revolution in Iran, although that was a Shia revolution, but as a response to the Shia revolution in Iran, you found the rise of political Islam, which was essentially Sunni-based. The core center of it being the Saudi ideology, Ahle Hadith, the Wahhabi ideology, which had come out from there. And this was the new war was emerging. The Cold War had ended. The war of the West against Islam was emerging at this. So everyone was concerned about the fact that here is a vulnerable population in Central Asia, 72 million strong, vulnerable population, which is there. Neighboring them on the Chinese side, Xinjiang, a population of 22 million, again Islamic. There again, the communist system very much continues to exist. So obviously, the permission to pursue Islam, the manner in which it is required to be pursued, is not there, and there is some major turbulence, a cultural turbulence, which is going on in Xinjiang too. The similar cultural turbulence did start in Central Asia, but it was managed reasonably well. Efforts were going on from Saudi Arabia in the 90s, early part of the millennium, to bring in tremendous influence here. of political Islam. Somehow it has not succeeded. But that effort to bring those spheres of influence into these areas and extend the hand of Ahl Hadith and organizations like this was a part of the new. Because now you are finding that it was important to the vulnerability of the tradeways, the infrastructure, etc., would be higher if you found alien ideologies emerging in this. So through the 90s, early part of the millennium, this competition has gone on. Somehow the Central Asians have not overnight absorbed radicalism or political Islam in that particular manner. They continue to remain very transparent, largely a tolerant kind of a society because of the kind of influence they lived under in the Soviet Empire in the shadow of. Russia cannot afford under any circumstance to allow this region to get transformed ideology. And where will this influence come? Ideological. The Chinese will not permit this area of Xinjiang, neighboring area to Central Asia, to either get transformed in any way, in any ideological way, because it will threaten their interest. So you find that there is a convergence of Sino-Russian interests in this particular area to prevent this kind of turbulence taking. My visit to Russia a couple of years ago and sitting with the intelligence community in Moscow explained to me very, very clearly for the Russians, this area is very dear. In the southeastern mode, this area is as important as the area of Ukraine, where all this is happening at the particular moment, and which I shall explain of separately. So there are two ends of the Soviet, of the former Soviet, or the Russian strategic concerns. Leave out the north and northeast, which is closer to China. Of course, that's a separate game by itself. But these two areas are very important for Russian interests. And what worries the Russians? What worries the Russians is the areas in Afghanistan in particular. The Russians are not so concerned about Iran because Shia theology, Shia ideology does not really exist to that extent, except in the areas of Azerbaijan. It does not extend into the rest of Central Asia. Afghanistan and its neighbor and our neighbor, Pakistan, is the core center of political Islam's ideology. And from here, the threat of flowing into this area is very, very live. Till the time that the Americans were present in Afghanistan, the dangers of this kind of an activity happening were comparatively minimal. Although what's happening in northern Afghanistan, the Americans didn't have much of an idea. They didn't have a physical control over it, but they had influence. They had reasonable influence. How the Pakistanis use this for influence into that area is anybody's guess. You must remember that for Pakistan, political Islam has been a weapon. This started from 1977 with the Zia Doctrine, which clearly established that the best way of, for example, tackling Jammu and Kashmir would be to export political Islam into Jammu, link up the Islamic population with the rest of the Islamic world, create a kind of an ethnic cleansing in Jammu and Kashmir, and through that means, through the means of ideological invasion, convert Jammu and Kashmir and take it right into the Pakistani fold. Similar thing are the efforts which Pakistan would like to make as far as Central Asia is concerned. Its influence extending into Jammu and Kashmir, its influence extending into Afghanistan, and through Afghanistan now extending its influence into Central Asia. Imagine the tentacles of the so-called Pakistani strategic empire moving into these areas. This is what the Russians feared tremendously. And this is one of the reasons why the Russians kowtowing to the whims and fancies of Pakistan from time to time. Now, people wonder, Imran Khan ko kyun bulaya? Why the hell have you called Imran Khan? Imran Khan is of no importance. Pakistan is of no importance. A lot of people have this kind of a perception. I want to differ with that perception and tell you, your neighbor Pakistan is strategically one of the most important, geostrategic, very, very important, because of its propensity to be a nuisance in the manner in which it can. And therefore, you will find that most nations will want to have a strong relationship, because Pakistan is almost at the core center of the developments. It can drive the developments in the new great game. For example, after 31st of August, when the Soviets, when the Americans withdrew from Kabul in a hurry and in reasonable disgrace, I would say, which was the country which was benefited hugely? Of course, Pakistan. Pakistan was benefited hugely. It had waited in the shadows for 20 years for this to happen. It had cultivated the Taliban right from 1981 on the western borders of Afghanistan. These were the students who were educated in the madrasas of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Baluchistan. And these were the people who grew up now. And by 1996, they grew up and took control of Afghanistan. And now 2022, 21, 22, they are the ones who are ruling Afghanistan. So obviously Pakistan has got great stakes here, because these are the people nurtured by Pakistan. It's not necessary that the Taliban will listen to Pakistan completely, but they are obviously quite beholden to them, and therefore will to some extent continue to remain beholden in this particular. Now in Afghanistan, the threat and danger at the moment is that in northern Afghanistan, there is a swath of territory which has traditionally over some time emerged as the core center of gravitation of major terrorist groups who are linked through Islamic ideology, political Islamic ideology. You have the ISIS, for example. The ISIS, after being evicted from the Middle East, remember the last battles they fought in Mosul and northern Iraq and places like that. After that, they attempted to go to Philippines. They fought the battles of Marawi and against the Philippines army, and has not been able to find a place where it can moor itself. There have been one-off attempts here and there in southern India, in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, in Bangladesh, but it has not really been able to get to grips with those situations. The place where it probably finds itself most comfortable is northern Afghanistan, and there are reasons. You see, the areas of the new great game have, first of all, a fair amount of riches as far as energy money is concerned. Turkmenistan itself is a major country which has got. Secondly, because of the east-west and infrastructure, there are royalties based upon the routes which are there, payments which are being made for that. So obviously, money is a major provider for the terrorist groups. Wherever there is money, wherever there are finances, a group like ISIS will always gravitate there. If you remember ISIS, the financial status of the ISIS right at the beginning, when it was created in 2014, it was created earlier, it came into prominence in 2000, was one, the looting of the Mosul treasury. $500 million, $500 million were looted from there in cash. And then, of course, they were selling oil from the Mosul refinery, which they were going, and they were selling it back to the various nations that they were fighting with. They were selling it to Syria, they were selling it even to Israel, they were selling it all over. And that money held them in good stead up to 2018. Otherwise, the ISIS would have collapsed much before. Here, now again in northern Afghanistan, money is available from the Central Asian treasuries, number one. Number two, the money is available through the drug. This is one of the high density circuits for narcotics, as you are all aware. Pakistan, Afghanistan, extending from here towards Turkey through the new great games of routes into Turkey, back to Iran and back to Pakistan. This is the Golden Crescent area. Tremendous amount of money available. And therefore, you find that this has become virtually the core center of terrorist gravitation. Even the Lashkar-e-Taiba, even the Jaish-e-Mohammed from Pakistan has gone there for international kind of influence. You have the various groups, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, the ETIM, which is also there from Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, has also gravitated there. Of course, Al-Qaeda is the oldest group which continues to remain located here. About 10 to 12 major international Islamic terrorist groups have gravitated. Pakistan has influence over perhaps 1, 2, or 3 of them, not too much. This is what worries the Russians. This is what worries the Chinese to a great extent. And therefore, and China and Russia are not too adept handling this kind of a threat. This typical political Islam kind of ideological threat. First of all, because they don't understand it, so they have to depend for guidance on someone else. That someone else who has emerged is Pakistan. So post Afghanistan, particularly, you will find that Pakistani influence has gone up hugely in this, and this is one of the reasons why Pakistan is emerging to be such an important nation for Russia. Of course, it's an important nation for China, and we are aware of the kind of relationship which has existed, continues to exist, deeper than the oceans and higher than the skies, and that kind of a relationship which has stayed here. Now, this is the situation of the new great game. Around about the end of 2021, the early part of 2022, how does what's happening on the other side of Russia influence this now? That should be a very, very interesting thing before I come to the effect on India and then wind up after that and take questions. You see, the pandemic itself has created a problem in terms of world order. When you talk about a world order is not something which is fixed. World order is very dynamic. It is changing dynamic situations based upon strategic relationships between different nations, the creation of various blocks, for example, the Quad now, which has come up in the Indo-Pacific, and things like that. NATO, the kind of strategic significance of NATO, which had diluted completely post the Cold War, it had diluted completely. There was no reason for NATO to exist, but NATO continued to exist at that time, and its eastward push to try and squeeze Russia so badly has actually led to the situation that we are in today. Russia has pushed. You see, Russia has to be very, very conscious of its security needs. It considers itself isolated, post-Cold War particularly. It considers itself isolated to a great extent. Remember, in the Cold War, Russia was networked. In a big way, it was networked. The whole of Warsaw Pact, and it has spheres of influence in different parts of the world. Much of Africa, you found they were competing, parties with each other in each of these countries, or countries against countries, which were balanced because one side was supported by the Soviet Union, the other supported by the United States and the Western powers. All that broke up after the Cold War ended, and Russia was left alone. Of course, it's very interesting to also observe at this stage that one of the masterpieces in these great games, one of the masterpieces which occurred, which led very largely to the breakup of the Soviet Union and the defeat of the Soviet Union, was the initiative taken by President Nixon. Actually, under Nixon, it was primarily Henry Kissinger, 1969. I still remember I was a student in Delhi when President Nixon visited. Kissinger came. From here, they went to Islamabad. India, Pakistan used to be hyphenated in those days. Anyone who came to Delhi always went to Islamabad. That is, of course, no longer true at the moment. So he went to Islamabad. From Islamabad, after a brief 12-hour halt, Nixon flew off, and Henry Kissinger, discussed with the Pakistani generals and set up a meeting with the Chinese in Beijing. Subsequently, he went to Beijing, and that was the commencement of what was called ping-pong diplomacy, right? Now, what was ping-pong diplomacy? It was all about the United States making sure that China, which was not emerging even at that time, but it was a large power. It had 900 million or 800 million population at that time. It had the potential to rise. Anyone could understand that at that particular time. It could play a major role in the Cold War. If the Russians and the Chinese had got together at that time, it would have been disadvantageous to NATO, So it was a 22 or 24 years after the Second World War. This was a major step taken by the Americans to make sure that they propped up China. China was virtually, in the grips of turbulence after the Cultural Revolution, Mao's Cultural Revolution, and was perhaps looking for some kind of a stick to hold, to be pulled up economically, etc. And it was isolated from the world. The Americans helped it to come up. The Americans helped it strategically. And that's where the economy of China, $14-15 trillion economy, primarily because the Americans were the ones who helped them. But they did it for an ulterior cause. They did it for the purpose of making sure that the Soviet Union was balanced and imbalanced, actually. Subsequently, you balance the power of the Soviet. Masterstroke, absolutely, which was done by Henry Kissinger, and he's written much on this. Now, in today's leadership, that seems to be lacking, because what's happening in Ukraine is the outcome of a lack of thinking. It's a complete lack of thinking when you have a set of big powers, the United States, China, Russia. Russia is a big power by virtue of the state, by virtue of its extent, by virtue of the fact that it's not a very big economy. It's a smaller economy than India, but it's a part of the big five, the P5 in the Security Council. So all that is still going for Russia. But Russia is hugely sensitive to its security. It has built a reasonable relationship. I won't call it a very strong, reasonable relationship with China. Interdependence on, in many ways, the landmass of whole of Asia, a part of Eurasia is all with them. The Americans, NATO should have ensured, they should have played. This was the great game for them to play, that they should have ensured that Russia was cultivated. If they were so keen to prevent the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific, what they prophesy as the not so friendly rise of China in the Indo-Pacific, then there's no reason to be fighting the Chinese in the Indo-Pacific, creating the Quad in the Indo-Pacific. They should have brought, in some way or the other, helped to develop, propped it up to some extent. The problem is lack of trust. You see, the victory of 1989, the end of the Cold War, the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, led to the typical syndrome of 1919. The 1919 syndrome is the Treaty of Versailles syndrome. What happened in 1919? First World War, the Allies won, they defeated Germany, they got together and they squeezed Germany so badly. You will not build ships beyond this, you will not build weapons beyond this, you will not build aircraft beyond this kind of aircraft, all kinds of restrictions. Squeeze Germany physically from every direction. And what happened 20 years later? Why 20 years? 10, 12 years later, you found the birth of German nationalism the birth of German nationalism led to the rise of Nazism, fascism, right? And you were at war. The Second World War had broken out by 1939. That's 20 years after the victory. It just shows victory is not a guarantee for peace. It's a question of how you manage your victory. Managing victory is far more important than just winning. So in this situation also, the post-Cold War situation also, NATO, the United States, absolutely heady with victory. 44 years later, after the end of the Second World War, the creation of the United Nations, the bipolar world, which was existing at the Soviet bloc and the US NATO bloc, etc. US and NATO were thrilled that they had defeated the Soviet. Well, one of the ways of managing victory in 1991 was to ensure you take the Russians on board. Then Russians also created a leadership such as Putin. And when they pushed Russia, they did not push Russia in the southern part, right? In the southern part, they did not push. In Central Asia, they, of course, attempts to cultivate a lot of influence in this area continued and continues even till today. But on the European theater, the efforts were made to squeeze in such a big way that Russia would perhaps never ever be able to be in a position to fight back, which meant most of the former Warsaw Pact states, the whole line of Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, etc., all of them became part of NATO. The entire Baltic republics, all three republics, some of the former Soviet republics themselves, attempts to get Georgia into NATO, right, which was resisted. If you remember, in 2008, the Russians resisted it. And that was the first message that the Russians said, enough is enough. NATO cannot march across there is a red line here, which has to be respected. This is Russian security. This is a Russian security requirement. No one bothered, no one listened, because they were all concerned about the future, the potential rise of Russia again. That Russia has the resources, although Russia has a dwindling population. I hope you know 140 million population today is reducing to about 110 million by the year 2040-40. That's a major challenge Russia faces. But Russia is rising. Once again, economically, it would have risen. Of course, today with sanctions is something different. But Russia was... And a degree of trust, a degree of assessment and analysis and appreciation would have pointed to the fact that which is the greater evil, Russia or China? Obviously China. With a rising 13, 14, $15 trillion economy, it would be a challenge to you. And they were making no bones about it. There would be a challenge to the Western world and to NATO. Russia should have been taken. They should have stopped this squeezing business going on. Some kind of a commitment. Tulsi Gabbard, the American Democrat Congress lady, who incidentally is one of the few American ethnic Hindus who's a member of the Congress, gave a very fine speech recently. Very fine speech, in which she mentioned that all it takes to stop this problem in Ukraine is for President Biden to give a commitment that the United States will not pursue its intent of absorbing Ukraine. All that. This is the only thing which we can avoid. I really appreciated that speech. But I thought the speech was slightly naive, because for an American to appreciate that at this time, 6 months after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, in virtual disgrace, the Americans are not in a position to give any such undertakings to anyone in the world to say that we will not admit Ukraine into NATO. And this kind of a stance that they have taken has ultimately led to the situation, the war which has come. Of course, there will be different perceptions of different people on that. So there can be a lot of questions which will come up, and I would love to answer them. But this is the prime reason why this war in Ukraine has taken place today, because red lines were being crossed, the squeeze was continuing, the post-Afghanistan situation, there were compulsions on the part of NATO, of the United States. After all, it is NATO which had withdrawn from Afghanistan, not just the United States. It was not possible for them to make these kind of noises, to send out a strategic message to say that NATO is so weak, the United States is so weak, that we make such statements to say that what we started in 1991 of squeezing the borders of Russia, we are no longer going to do it. Not possible. Because the grim reality was that everyone was sitting on there. Now, how does this emerging situation, where will this situation end? Because that will influence what is happening in the new great game there. Remember, there are two ends of Russia. There are two ends of Russia. For the moment, we are all transfixed the European theater. We need to consider the Central Asian new great game theater as the second area of priority for the moment. The Indo-Pacific at the moment is on the back burner, because no one is even looking at it except the Taiwan issue and the potential of China. Perhaps everyone has got his tentacles out to see will the Chinese do something, but I don't think the Chinese will do anything. The Middle East is quiet, particularly after the Abraham Accords. So it is this area which is at the core center of geopolitics of the world. And that will dictate the post-pandemic order which will emerge. So it's very important at this time. Conflict termination in Ukraine will dictate the immediate world order, a post-pandemic. We are in the post-pandemic situation. Hopefully we are. And how will it exactly pan out? To my mind, this conflict is a very, very destructive conflict. And there are no victors and there are no victors. Even if Russia will, of course, capture Kyiv. It will capture Kyiv physically. Some other major cities, it will blockade Odessa, it will blockade the Black Sea ports, Sevastopol and places like that. All that will be done. But at the end of the day, a proxy war, the kind of proxy war fought in Jammu and Kashmir, which is still carrying on, a proxy war in Ukraine, a proxy war maybe in Belarus, across the frontiers, will probably be launched by NATO. Proxy wars are usually not easily winnable wars. Although I was speaking to an American general day before yesterday, and I was reminding him that the last time the Americans won a war, a hybrid war, was in the 80s. It won a proxy war in Afghanistan, and the nation which was the proxy, which was fighting on behalf of the United States in Afghanistan, was Pakistan. Saudi money, petrodollars, American weapons and arms and intelligence, of course, Pakistan ground leadership, and of course the Taliban or elements of the Mujahideen at that time, who got together and defeated. This was proxy war. If they go by that reminder of that, I'm not sure if they are opening their strategic literature and looking at it to see what are the principles of proxy war. Proxy war is what probably they will launch, because they are not going to give victory to the Russians in this manner so easily. So if that happens, you're going to find the eastern a central theater of Europe, to remain live, militarily live, for fairly long, for fair amount of time. It will remain live, and the world order will be that it would have pushed Russia into the hands of China completely. The Chinese and the Russians would be hand in glove completely, and the Russians would be supporting the Chinese in the Indo-Pacific, towards the Indo-Pacific. Supporting means not so much militarily, but ensuring, for example, that the Sino-Russia border is completely stable, completely free of any threats, etc. Continue providing all the gas, the oil, the energy to China, which it requires for its efforts from time to time. They've already signed a $117 billion contract during the recent visit, which was made to Beijing. So the Putin's visit to Beijing, which was there for the Winter Olympics. So a lot of things have already happened. So now you're going to find a distinct camp with NATO, Russia, Western powers, NATO, United States, and a very strong emerging Sino-Russia kind of a relation. And as much as the proxy war efforts will go on in Eastern and Central Europe, efforts to squeeze Russia from the Central Asian region will also continue. I am only hopeful that people are sensible and realize that in Central Asia and through Central Asia, pressurizing the Russians is going to be one of the most dangerous things. What kind of a weapon will you have to threaten this? To carry out proxy wars in the regions close to the Russian borders in Central Asia? It will be through ideology. It will be through ideology. And who can play ball in that? Our good friends, once again. So, as much as Pakistan became a frontline state, if you remember in 1980, post the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Pakistan can emerge as your frontline state again. After all, the Americans haven't left the hand of Pakistan. Pakistan's geostrategic position, as I explained to you in the beginning, is so important. If you have to fight a war in Afghanistan, if you have to fight a war anywhere in Central Asia, which is the country through which you will fight this war? Only through Pakistan, Afghanistan. Unless, of course, Iran gets befriended now and Iran signs on the dotted line in Vienna, where these talks are going on for the moment. If that happens, then of course the Iranians also be used. So the economic squeeze is to try and bring turbulence in this area of Central Asia, squeeze out Russia as far as energy and oil is concerned with Europe. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline, $11 billion that the Germans have virtually agreed to give up. All this will have an intense effect on Russia. And then that could emerge in Russia attempting to go out. It may not do much in the area of Europe, because it realizes the potential of the dangers of that region. But it could potentially attempt to protect itself from its underbelly, and that's the area from where this ideological kind of wars can be launched against. So that's it. This is the kind of situation which could emerge. What is India in the middle? What is India's stance? India's stance is very clear. We need the Russians, because if we are far too close geographically, geostrategically, we are far too close to the new great game area. Our interests are there in the new great game areas. After all, we potentially look at trading with 72 million population of Central Asia. We can trade through Iran. We can trade through Chabahar, because the Pakistanis are not going to give us access through Afghanistan. We can do this through Iran. If the situation develops where sanctions on Iran are lifted, Chabahar will once again become a very, very important access route into Central Asia. That's one thing for us. The second thing which worries us is that Pakistan must not emerge as a frontline state in this, because the renewal of this great game and the renewal of energy in this great game, the use of ideology in this great game is going to give a boost to Pakistan. And then someone is going to give them a boost economically. At the moment, they're in doldrums. A boost economically, and they start coming back. Imagine a economically stable Pakistan, the kind of havoc it can render in different directions, in Afghanistan and Central Asia, and then definitely not forgetting its 1977 Zia. Also, we need the Russians. We need the Russians to make sure that Central Asia is contested, the new great game is contested. We need the Russians because of our stance with China on the northern borders. Northern borders is one place where no one under the sun is going to come to your support. We are on our own completely. If things happen in the maritime zone in the Indian Ocean, yes, the world will come with us. countries. A lot of countries will come with it. But here we are on our own completely. We need Russia. Russia will always have something to twist China with. Energy is one of the major things. Long border that they have with them is the other thing. Therefore, and also the existing historicity of the Indo-Russian relationship obviously is a big backup for that. We are doing the right thing at the moment. It's a very difficult choice at the moment of what's happening in Ukraine to make up. I can imagine what the MES dilemma must be at the moment, and I can imagine the dilemma of the ambassador sitting at the permanent representative sitting in the United Nations, who has to pick up the paper and read India's stance. Not an easy thing. And people who have to face the media anyway to understand why is India's stance. Because you see, the humanitarian situation is going to keep getting worse, and the pressure on India is going to continue building. How long can we resist it? So, question, but we are doing all this in our geostrategic, geopolitical affairs. It's not the love for a neighbor or the love for a nation which leads you to relationships and partnership. It is yourself, the interest, the geostrategic and the geopolitical interest. Our geopolitical interest is definitely there to be a part of the Quad, to remain a strategic partner of the United States, to be seen as a nation which is seen to be in support of democracies around the world. But at the same time, we can't afford to put our eggs into one basket, because we have to strategically balance our northern borders and the potential threats coming from our. This is a time when I look for some great questions. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. I think this was one of the very interesting sessions, and the audience were glued to the screen. I have been receiving a lot of WhatsApp messages also that this has been a very interesting session. You have very aptly given a clue about the geostrategy and the geopolitics. And it is not just a war between Russia and Ukraine, but so many other countries and the history of it all. You have just spoken about so much. The map is clearly visible, right? From Russia to, I think, Myanmar, you have covered almost all the countries which are there, and also about the political situation and the other situations which are there with respect to terrorism or political Islam or the power game or the energy scenario. So many things you have covered. I think you just spoke from the heart. And one last point, because we are running short of time, I think I need to thank you specially that after 5 years, you have chosen this forum to speak about the new great game, as you call it. And so we are really blessed and honored that you have chosen this forum, and we will be really happy that we can share this to big audience in the future. So I pass it on to AVM Sinha sir. I think we have time for about 2 or 3 questions, so we can just
definitely
go through it.
Thanks, sir. It was really interesting. Explain the various spheres of influence, and I don't know, the collision, what the outcome is very, very appears to be a bit worrisome for India, because the Sino-Russia collision, there are many questions on that aspect. This new collision which is going to occur, and of course the front line state, Pakistan, which is adept in weaponizing the political Islam ideology and trying to foster the things in the Central Asia and the Afghanistan region. We are all wary of that, sir, but yes, that's what's going to be. And your prediction of proxy wars in this area of Central Asia and the Ukraine and Belarus, and NATO is going to take full advantage. Sir, the first question is from our regular viewer, Mr. Dharmesh Jangla. On the same line, he is saying, sir, we are supporting Russia, and let's say tomorrow, hypothetical, Indo-Pak war breaks out, then will Russia support us? And he's also saying, because of the nuclear war scenario which is being painted today in the Ukraine, sir, will we go nuclear? Is there any possibility?
Okay. Thank you for that question. I thought we are already nuclear. We are already nuclear. They're a declared nuclear state and accepted as a declared nuclear state. But yes, to try and understand the dynamics of a situation in the Indo-Pak situation and what stance Russia will take. Yes, to my mind, it's not a black and white answer, first of all. You can't have a black and white answer in geopolitics of this nature. Let me allude first to the issue of the nuclear threat in the Ukraine theater. To my mind, that's a what do you call a typical red herring. It's been drawn across the the television screens primarily for the purpose diverting attention through the good old information war. You see, the world's eyeballs are all stuck here, and suddenly they hear the term nuclear and they say, my God, you mean to say in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, this could lead to a nuclear war? Nuclear, many times, first of all, people should be very clear that nuclear weapons are never for war fighting. They are meant for deterrence. How much deterrence was achieved in the Cold War? How much is it achieved now? Cold War, obviously, it was completely achieved. You didn't find a small war being fought in Europe. Post-Cold War, you found the first of the small wars was in Bosnia, which went on for 5 years, 1991 to 1996. And now you're finding this particular in Ukraine, which has emerged into a warlike situation. The potential use of nuclear weapons here, the outcome of the use of nuclear weapons, it can hardly be foreseen. But what the effect of that will be. But the threat of the use of nuclear weapons is definitely an important. And especially now that it is emerging, and American intelligence is also telling us, I don't know how reliably, is also telling us that the mind of the Russian president may not be very stable. That's also a part of information warfare also, of course, that the mind of the Russian president may not be stable, and therefore the nuclear button at the moment is a major threat. There's no doubt about that. That possibility is there, if there's any truth in what the Americans are saying. But to my mind, personal belief and looking at the situation as it is, I think it is the whole threat of nuclear war is being used as a diversionary in the Ukraine, in the parlance of Ukraine. Now coming to the issue of potential Indo-Pakistan war and which side with the Russians. Go back to 71. It was a divided world. It was a Cold War world. You had the Western and you had the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact versus NATO, two clear blocks, bipolar world. The Russian interest was very clear that they needed to have a major power on their side, a major emerging country on their side, particularly with a large landmass, having control over the sea routes in the Indian Ocean. So and the problem of ideology had not come up. The problem of ideology had not emerged as a weapon. 71 was pre-Zia doctrine time, if you remember. 77 came the Zia doctrine. So it was a clear-cut choice that the Soviet Union, a strong relationship with India, it sided with. Is that a guarantee today in 2020? I can't say. For I personally feel it's a very awkward choice. It will be the same choice that India has today. Should we side with Russia? Should we side with NATO? It is the same choice that the Russians will have. As I told you, Pakistan is not a pushover. Pakistan is, and I'm one of those people who keep reminding everyone, whenever you look at your adversary, give him more than what is due. The moment you start diluting the capability of your adversary, you start going wrong in your stance and how to deal with him. Here, put him on a pedestal. Say, you are most important country. How do you deal with this country? Then you realize it has the potential. In the new great game, it is one of the most important countries. It is through this that the ideological battles could all be fought. The threats to Russia, to China, everything could be through this area. And everyone is looking for Islamic strategic guidance from Pakistan for this role because it has played a huge game in Afghanistan all these years, and they understand this extremely well. The ISI is a past master at this. Today, I will not stick my neck out to say that the Russians will go whole hog and support you. They will tell you stop the war. Diplomacy is the better means. So exactly the same words that we are using today in the United Nations have the Russians.
Sir, another interesting question again from IG BN Sharma and a similar thing is from the Mr. Avani Kumar Sinha. What they are saying, sir, our neutral stance today, and we are supporting Russia. Will this stance be in our favor as far as the China's aggression in the northern borders? Will Russia influence sphere? Anything?
I did allude to this in my talk, and I knew this issue has to come up, but this is a very interesting, all thinking brains, strategic brains are all thinking about this at the moment, and I said you can't have black and white. We have to I coined a terminology which you may have seen in some of my writings and in some of my talks which I have been giving. I said India, as a non-aligned country, was always neutral. We are leaders of the non-aligned movement from 1955 onwards. But at that time, we were a weak power, right? I mean, no one looked at us strategically as an important emerging power. Today, we are still neutral. We are still neutral at the moment, but our neutrality is of a different kind. We have a $3 trillion economy backing that neutrality. Number one, we are an emerging power. We are a middle power. We are a strategic partner of the United States. We are a member of the Quad. We are a potential member of an AUKUS kind of an organization in the Indo-Pacific in the future. One doesn't know at this time. All this gives us a different status. So our neutrality today is of a different kind. Called it informed neutrality. It's an informed neutrality. If you notice, each time the permanent representative of India in the UN and now at the moment in the Security Council reads out our stance, he explains it very beautifully. And that's the beauty of draftsmanship, the capability in the MEA. You have to be a great draftsman. How to draft out the right words alludes to this fact that we are a democracy. All right, we believe in rights of people. We have principles and values, right? And we don't want to see war. We want to see the cessation of hostilities at the earliest. We want to see the restoration of diplomacy as a means to resolve international problems. All these words are put together, and that's a very important thing, which is then projected in the and India so far in the last 10 days hasn't lost out in any way. But as I said, the pressure is building. The pressure is building. It's not so much the political opinion of leaderships. It is the public opinion which makes a difference. And public opinion in the United States, public opinion is building. It's India, largest democracy of the world, and it's not even siding with those who are fighting for democracy and things like that. Now, that's an awkward one. So as we go along, it's going to be increasingly difficult to justify. It's going to be increasingly difficult, even more challenging, and that's where our it's a great time to have a professional diplomat as your external affairs. This is the time actually is bearing out exactly when you have if you see Jaishankar Saab went to Melbourne, it prevented the Quad meeting from getting hijacked into a Ukraine affair. He kept it at the Indo-Pacific. Went to Munich, the Munich summit, he spoke security summit, one of the most important security summits in the world in February every year. He spoke there, he spoke in an informed way and explained India's stance there. Went to France, met Macron, right? Assisted Macron in various statements, this, that, continued doing it. So he's a respected figure at the moment, and much of the world is looking up to him. People are ringing him up, calling him up, ringing up Prime Minister Modi from time to time. The fact that Prime Minister Modi has spoken twice or maybe thrice even to President Putin so far shows that India matters. India does matter. I mean, that's not for anyone to explain why India matters. But the fact remains that as we go along, this is going to get very, very...
So last question of the evening. Again, it's a very wishful thinking. And because of what you said, sir, the public pressure, mounting pressure day as increases and extends. Do we go for US or we still remain to Russia? This is from the Piyush section and something like from Mr. Vilas Rajput. Sir, your take.
I recently heard Shiv Shankar Menon Saab, the former national security, and I thought Shiv Shankar Menon would speak politically perhaps and take the stance of being pro-Russia completely and things like that. No, but he's too much of a professional to ever take that kind of... And he continued to back what the government of India is doing at the moment. Now, our informed neutrality at this time, to my mind, is actually a slightly weighing towards... It is weighing towards that. If there is a you don't know how... You see the dynamics of the situation at the moment, you cannot predict. There could be a change of leadership even in Russia tomorrow. If there's a change of leadership in Russia, how do we respond to a particular thing? I think, to my mind, we will continue playing it in the same manner in which we are playing at the moment, not taking a pro-Russian, not taking a pro-NATO stance, keeping ourselves above this. If you notice countries like UAE, China, of course, has also taken a stance on which is neutral, attempted neutrality or informed neutrality. Saudis, UAE, etc. have all taken a very... Israel has taken a neutral stance. Of all countries, Israel, which has been supported to the hilt by the United States, the manner in which you are finding anti-tank weapons being flown into Ukraine or brought into Ukraine to fight the Russians, the same way in 1973, Israel got saved by the United States because of the TOW missile. Now at the moment it's the Javelin missile, the TOW missile, with hundreds of TOW missile launchers were brought to Tel Aviv and they were thrown into the Suez front. And that's what held back the famous armor thrust of the Egyptians at that time. There are a lot of similarities of these situations. I think we can continue to live in this world with a very, very informed.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Mr. Sri Vinod Goenka ji, the tank behind our think tank, the main tank. Vinod ji, the data sovereignty champion.
What a fantastic evening listening to your journal. Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain. If I read your decorations, it will be another evening. PVSM, AVSM, UYSM, SM, VSM, that too bar. Sir, I'm really impressed. And this is the third time I have this honor to talk to you directly. Few of us would know that the doctrine which you started in JNK, and I would like to mention that particular part, the doctrine of hard doctrine which you started there by running that KPL, the Kashmiri Premier League. And I would request you that someday also mention about that, because how you change. And today, if things are good in Kashmir, it was not only your uniform, but your vision and your heart, which worked along with the uniform there. You had three ways to do it. One, use arms where it was required, use brain where it was required, and the heart, which was missing in the earlier journals of the commanding officers. Fantastic. So I thought I'd just inform people who are here. In the entire 70-minute talk, what I could gather is three part of the kinetic wars which were there, and all this reason of roots and access, the region of energy, the access to energy or denial of energy, so that supremacy of economics can come in. And also, finally, you touched upon the most sensitive, which many of the journals who wear uniform try to avoid talking about, is the views, the policies which are being driven by ideology of particular sections. I think probably that was the best part of the entire conversation. Non-kinetic warfare, which also leads to kinetic warfare, was touched upon by you in very nice way. And I think everybody who listened to this particular talk today is impressed. I need one more promise from you, sir. You will be back with us when we have season 4. And someday, when God willing, if we can do a non-virtual show in Delhi, bless us there. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank few of the people who were there here. I was blessed to see Dr. Chandrakant Ghabak, who was my professor when way back in the institute I was being trained. Colonel Ramtri, my colleague, Dharamveer Jangra, Group Captain Gurdeep Singh, Group Captain PV Shetty, Group Captain PV Singh. I could also see Rear Admiral Shrikhande sir. I saw IGBSF Sharma sir and many other people I would have missed, because many of them have logged in with acronyms or maybe probably shadow names, so I may not be able to see them through right now. I would like to take this opportunity to thank a couple of people who made this particular talk possible. Of course, Air Vice Marshal Pranay Sinha sir, who has been the brainchild behind this particular series of Thus Spake Generals, and this is the third time which he has done it. And I'm happy to tell everybody that everybody who is either Major General, Lieutenant General, or Admiral or AVM look forward to speak in this particular forum, and this is purely because the quality which has been maintained by all the speakers who are there. I would like to thank Dr. Deepa Prakash. She has been the fighting spirit behind this particular series. Dr. Nagaratna, and of course Sumitra Goenka, who helped us to put this show in place. So I would like to thank everybody, and with your permission, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain sir, if I can say that today's evening was a great evening, and we can look forward for another talk the next time when AVM Pranay Sinha invites us. Thank you, sir. Jai Hind. And lastly, sir, I like the war cry, Badri Vishal ki Jai, and let that be always there. See the victory of the son of Lord Badrinath. Thank you, sir.
Since you have brought that war cry of mine, of my regiment, let me explain that Jai Badri Vishal or Bol Badri Vishal Lal ki Jai essentially means victory to the followers of Lord Vishnu. You see, Badri Vishal is a personification of Lord Vishnu. And my Gadwalis, Uttarakhandis, Gadwalis are worshippers of Lord Vishnu. It's a tradition that we go every year. The colonel of the regiment goes to Badrinath and puts a bell there at the beginning of the season. That ensures the safety of my men of my regiment. The greatest thing is, as a Muslim, I'm an Indian Muslim. I have always led the prayers and always led all the emotions of my regiment, of my men, whenever it comes to the followership on Lord Badri.
Sir, you made us proud, and I cannot explain this to the gathering who is here, what your men think about you. Whenever we discuss with the people who were led by you, they all discuss about you. And I'm proud that you were here, sir. Thank you very much for coming and speaking.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my Pranay Sinha. Thank you so much. And
Right,
Sumitra Goenka ji, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And I thank all the audience who are here. Thank you.